What's up, y'all, and welcome back to Found Bytes, a game review series. My name is Brian, and I'll be your host. If you don't know about us, we're all about finding and testing out small, high-quality video games. This is a podcast that aims to respect your time and money as a gamer and a consumer by sifting through storefronts and sales to find those gems that may be worth your precious resources. But enough about the show. Let's get into our next game. Exographer is the game for this week's episode. Exographer is a 2D sci-fi Metroidvania platform puzzle game developed by Sci-Fun Games and released in 2024. The game is available on PC, Switch, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, so this is only current-gen consoles, although not including Switch 2. So the basic gist of this game, it's heavy sci-fi. It's a lot about particle physics, really nerding out about physics in general, things like energy and different particles that are discovered. It's really cool how a lot of the sci-fi stuff is incorporated into the gameplay mechanics with the different upgrades that you get. And overall, just great 2D platforming. It's very unique. It has puzzles akin to like Chants of Sonar. Sometimes you're going to sit and look at something for a little bit. But otherwise, a typical Metroidvania with that kind of unique saving and fast travel mechanic. So a lot of things that are pretty fresh in this game. The game released with an MSRP of $19.99. And runtime of the game, just to get straight through, it might take you about 8 or 9 hours. To be a completionist, it might take you over 12. I don't know if I can get the Platinum Trophy. It requires like you beating the game without dying, so maybe to get everything, you might have to play the game twice through, which I would. I don't think I'm going to try. But me, I've been playing it on PS5. I got it on sale for $11.99, and I beat it in about 11 hours. I beat the game, and then you get like an end cutscene, and then I went back and tied up some loose ends, and I kind of got another cutscene. And nothing in terms of there being a physical release. I think there's something in the works for it, but it hasn't come out yet. I'm really interested if the game drops a vinyl soundtrack because I'm super into the music in this game. And like I said, it was developed by Sci-Fun Games, so SCI, like Science Fun Games. And this is a small French team run by a French physicist. And it seems, by looking on their website, they have some kind of a strong mission for the intersection of games and science education, which I'm all about. I am a science teacher, and I had a short little correspondence with the guy who's the head of the team, and he was telling me that he actually used this game in some of his physics classes to talk about, I guess energy and particles and all that good stuff. So really cool. I'm all about it. I had not heard of this game. I hadn't seen it on any kind of Twitter or Reddit or anything like that. I just saw it on sale. It looked pretty cool. And I'm a science nerd, so I dove right in. All right, let's talk gameplay for Exographer, or is it Exographer? I don't know. I'm just going to keep saying Exographer. But this is a 2D side-scroll Metroidvania platformer. What's interesting about this is there's no combat. You're not really fighting any enemies. You are avoiding hazards, but I think that puts a kind of a patient spin on this game. It's not really meant to be stressful, but there are still some interesting head-scratching things that you have to tackle. But let's start with the basics. So 2D, so you can move left to right. You're only moving at one speed. It's a fine speed. You're not worried about moving faster. When you're walking around, you might bump into things that have a prompt that'll come up to interact with. It could be like an elevator button or a door button or some kind of mechanism that you're interacting with. You do have a jump button, but there's no ledge grab or anything like that, so you do have to clear if you're doing just a jump. You have the ability to take a picture, which is just a screenshot. That's just a single button, and you'll see the screen flash. This will have many uses, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can pull up the menu where you can really get into the lore, the collectibles, the fast travel, the map. So that's really useful. You're going to be doing that a lot. And eventually you'll get into some advanced platforming with different mechanisms as you get more upgrades that really make this game pretty challenging and pretty interesting. Some of the puzzles and some of the things that you can do, whether you think you can initially or not, it really takes some time to notice all of the things that are possible. And at times you will have like a cursor moving around, almost like a mouse, where you can select things. And this is basically anytime you bring up the menu, so you can tell, PC was in mind. But also in certain puzzles, when you get onto a certain screen, you'll have a cursor where you can go and you can select things and drag them. And let's start with talking about pacing of the game. So this game is linear, and what that means essentially is you're just moving forward in game, and there's no real map sequence. Like when you're in a quote-unquote room or one screen, like you'll be able to look at the map, but you're only going to see that map for that screen. And there's no like master map where it says like, oh, this area goes to this area, like you might see in a typical Metroidvania, which is really interesting and kind of unique, I feel. Initially, I was a little stressed out by this, but eventually I realized that it kind of didn't really matter. The reason for that is because there are some mechanics that you have access to right away, and those mechanics are saving the game and fast travel. So those both kind of revolve around this screenshot that you're able to take. And anytime you take a screenshot, if you're just standing there, that's going to count as like a save point. And then if anything happens, that's where you would essentially be brought back to. But what's also interesting is you can use it to take pictures of things in your environment. And depending on if there's something in the environment right around you that is significant, it's going to take a picture of that, and then that will create like a fast travel location point in your journal. Now, you can't just do that anywhere. It has to be specific things in the journal. So typically when you get to a new map screen or just a new screen, you'll have to find like the significant place and then stand there and take a screenshot, and then it'll add like that area's entry into your journal, and then whatever was taken a snapshot of, you'll be able to move your cursor in the menu and just fast travel to that. It's interesting because despite it being like a map and you having fast travel, you're actually fast traveling on like the journal screen, because there's a link between the location that's significant and sort of information that you're reading in the journal. And what's also interesting is you're going to be filling in the journal for a particular area. And when you have one of them, you'll get access to the page that has all of the information for that area, but you'll have missing pieces, and you'll just see like these rectangles on the screen that have vague pictures of places on the map, kind of giving you visual clues that those are the other locations in that area you need to go to and take a screenshot of. And what's nice is once you take a picture in the correct area, you'll be able to, at any point, fast travel back to that past discovered journal location. So like I said, there's like multiple in an area or a screen. And so you might be able to go into your journal at any point and go back to a prior location. And if it's not the right place in that area, you can just go to one of the others in that area on the journal screen. It seems complicated. I'm probably not explaining it well, but it's super intuitive once you start to populate it. And this is really going to be great for backtracking and finding collectibles. Once you sort of get your bearings about how it works, the completionist in me went back to old screens just to kind of get my bearings about where I was or how to get back to certain places. This is what makes the fact that there's no like master map or grand map kind of insignificant and unimportant, because you're able to just fast travel based on places you've been before. And also in sort of this linear pacing of the game, upgrades to your platforming are going to be evenly spaced and synergized with where you are and how much you're progressing. So this is something that you'll just come across, and you'll have to cross that bridge when you get to it, but you're going to get these things that allow you to progress through the game further and further. So speaking of progression, let's just talk general. So I've talked about like map screens or map areas. So the game is screen to screen, but not like your typical rectangle in a Metroidvania, and you're not doing it frequently. Like each area is one giant screen that you're moving your character around, and then you can see on the map like how far this one area or this one screen actually extends. But each of these areas will have a place on the map where it's like you go down this hallway and that leads you to the next area, and it'll black screen and then open up on another screen. So these areas, pretty large, pretty extensive, and really the grandiose nature of the structures that you're seeing kind of in the background are really interesting and show up on the map. And often you're going to find that even just walking around or platforming in an area, you're going to be flipping back and forth to the map quite frequently, just to kind of gauge where you are in reference to where you might be trying to go. And so let's talk about the platforming in the game. So we've already said like you're going to move around, you're going to jump, and you got to clear things to be able to get onto a platform until you start to get some of the upgrades. Now, I don't want to spoil too much of this, but these upgrades are basically used to interact with the environment or potential hazards in the environment to allow you to traverse them more easily or in different unique ways. So just two examples. Like you'll get this sort of force field that's a circle around you that makes certain blocks or certain materials in the environment. It makes it so that you can just pass through them. Once you get this, you'll have areas that maybe you saw before or maybe are blocking off your path to keep continuing, where it's just like all of these blocks, but then you turn on the magnet or the force field and then you just kind of walk through. So you'll get used to that right away. And then you'll get something else, something kind of like magnet boots that can allow you to basically walk up certain surfaces along the side, underneath, and some of the surfaces that you interact with can also have the magnet boots apply to it, but also some different ones. And so what's interesting is as you're getting these upgrades, you're really testing out the waters to find out what surfaces interact with the new upgrade you got differently, and how you can use that to your advantage to try and platform or progress to certain areas. And so this is actually going to bring about like a really extensive sort of synergistic approach to platforming that maybe when you first look at the game or before you get an upgrade, you didn't even think was possible. So you're going to kind of be exposed to the possibilities of different sequences. And these could be related to, turning on and off certain upgrades with certain timing, comparing the refresh rates between them, finding out what you can do in what sequence. There's really a lot of situations where you have to think outside the box. I mean, there were times where I just looked at a screen for, maybe a couple minutes, and I really had to think like logically, how am I going to progress this? I turn this on here, I turn this off here, and then I have them both working here. I really found it to be surprising because as you play through the beginning of the game, you think this is just simple. You're just running and jumping, trying to platform, but it really gets complex. Honestly, had moments where I was reminiscent of Mega Man X, where it's like you're getting these different upgrades and then you're seeing a situation and you're like, can I do this? Can I make this jump? Can I like wall ride here or do this there? And so I really found it to be nostalgic in a way that I wasn't expecting, finding unique challenges and puzzles that really got my brain kind of thinking in different ways. And so you're going to use these upgrades and the platforming to arrive at certain locations when you get on a new area in a new map. It could be interacting to get the door open to the next area. So again, sort of that linear pacing, but all of a sudden you've got new upgrades, new tools, new gadgets, and different obstacles that you can surpass. Also alongside this are going to come puzzles. So some of them quite literally could be just a platforming puzzle where things might be timed, or again, you have to think outside the box. Maybe you have to do some things where you're looking at things in the background, matching symbols in the environment to like different mechanisms. So there are going to be different puzzles literally in the environment, but then there are going to be other puzzles where once you are in a new area and you gather all of the fast travel locations or getting the different pictures in the room that you're supposed to get, one of them is going to be a yellow one that is going to call for you to analyze. So you're going to unlock the analysis for this area or this room or whatever. Once you do that, you go into a separate menu. The analysis menu is kind of like this visual puzzle where you're given somewhere between 1 and 5 tiles, and you have to put them in the correct place. Now, as you progress through the game, you're going to get access to various filters that will make some of these analysis puzzles a little more challenging, where you might have to do something to the objects in the tiles that also connect with the puzzle that is on the main screen. But basically, a lot of this has to do with energy and waves, and like patterns of things going in or going out, and you have to match up what's happening on each tile with the correct placement for what's happening in the main screen. Again, seems a little complex, but it's honestly just a lot of lines, and when you put on different filters, the lines will be like roadways moving in different directions, and you have to match the directions with where the tile would fit in the puzzle. It's honestly pretty simple, but it really can get complex. Again, the more you progress in the game, you're going to get access to more filters, more ways of looking at these puzzles. And even just solving these is kind of like a means to an end. You're going to get access to a new letter or a new particle or a new energy filter or something like that that allows you then in the future to solve more complex analysis puzzles. And let's talk about collecting in this game. So most of the collecting, I would say you kind of have to do, but there definitely is some optional collecting. So we talked about the different analysis puzzles. You're going to basically be populating letters on a wheel that constitute like the different particles that you're discovering. You're going to potentially get all of these if you just go through the game linearly, but some of them, like, you're going to have to get all of the journal locations in all the areas. There are other things to collect outside of, the journal locations. There's also NPC journal entries kind of on a different tab where there's not like a specific area that these map pieces are to be found at. They're scattered throughout like the entire game. This is where you might do a little more backtracking, but again, the same kind of format. Like once you get introduced to certain NPCs as you go through the game linearly, they will have a screen pop up and then there'll be multiple kind of grayed out journal locations you need to find, and they have sort of vague pictures of where they might be, but they don't tell you the exact area. So these are a little more complex to be able to find. Trophies, I think for the most part, if you do all the collecting, you'll get most of the trophies, but there's one trophy that I talked about previously where it says you can't die, and we'll talk about dying in a second. So do an entire run without dying. I don't think I could possibly do this. I would certainly have to play through the entire game again. But some of these sequences, I don't know if I could do it without dying. There might be a loophole for how you sort of respawn. And let's kind of get into that now with accessibility. So we talked about previously fast travel and save. They're so good in this game. It makes backtracking, collecting just really breezy. And also, if you ever worry about where you are, like you can easily just fast travel back to a prior location and find your way connecting the two places if you were lost or didn't know how you got there. But the save mechanic is also interesting, and it kind of revolves around dying. So just so we know, once again, there's no combat in this game. So you're not having enemies attack you or shoot you or anything like that. But there are hazards in the game. Some of the hazards you might not realize, but anytime you jump into something and you just keep falling, like there are areas on the map that just the bottom drops out and there's nothing there. That's a pit and you will die if you jump in there. But the main one that you're going to get exposed to is kind of this like dark quicksand, which is like spaces on the 2D map that are taken up by it. If it's only one space high, you can actually walk through it. You're going to walk very slowly. But if it's any deeper, you'll keep sinking. And if your whole body is under it, you'll die. Same thing goes if you have on like the force field that allows you to pass through certain blocks. If you turn it off while you're in there, you will die because then you'll be stuck in the rock. Anytime that you quote unquote die, you're allowed to reload the last screenshot or save point that you had. But you're also allowed to fast travel. So like instead of reloading the last save screen, you can just teleport to another location. I don't know which of these constitutes as dying. Maybe just anytime you quote unquote die, or I don't know if it's if you reload a screenshot save or fast travel. I don't know, but you're going to have to really do some research if you're trying to get the platinum trophy, because I think any of these might constitute dying. What is interesting though is if you are trapped in the goop and you know you're going to fall down the quicksand, don't hit screenshot because it'll kind of snap right as you're dying. And since you're getting sucked into the quicksand, you can't jump out. So if you hit the screenshot and then you die and then reload the screenshot, you're going to be right back in the quicksand. So this is a little reminiscent of the Rick and Morty episode where he has like the save point remote that Rick makes for him, and he eventually just hit the wrong button at the wrong time, and then he goes back to a point that is useless because it's after where he wanted to be. Same thing kind of here. But the advice here is just screenshot often, save often, but I'm pretty sure you can only go back to the very last one, or you can do the fast travel. So be aware of that. All right, let's talk about the vibe of Exographer. So let's start with the visuals. This is a 2D pixelated game, so think of things like Dandara, Wall World, games like that where you're getting a sense of the characters, but you're not getting the smallest detail down. But you've got pixels, and it is that sort of 16-bit charming pixelation. But talking about colors, so for the most part, I'd say it's mainly drab, like a beige or a faint blue or a gray. It kind of depends on the area. Like when you're underground or something like that, where you're not getting a lot of sunlight, it's definitely going to be darker and have sort of those drab colors. Sometimes you are outside and you do get a vague sense of maybe like a sky or maybe clouds, but it's just not over the top, like popping with color. There are some distinctions that are helpful, especially in the environment. So hazards, they're going to be a pretty big deal because that's what you have to be aware of to not step on or whatnot. And also that's what you're going to need to be aware of when you have the different upgrades so that you know how things interact. So there's going to be spaces that are like the dark goo, like we talked about. There's going to be the yellow bricks. There's going to be sort of this weird yellow chain kind of fence thing that's sometimes in the background on the wall. That's something you can interact with. But for the most part, you're seeing a lot of the pixelation and the detail in the foreground, but the backgrounds are kind of more blurry, but they're less pixelated, so they're more kind of picturesque. Your character, different hazards in the foreground, things like that, definitely more pixelated, but you're going to see a lot of things in the background, like different machines or what looks like workspaces or workbenches or desks, just kind of technical things, features that might be implemented, like different lasers. The backgrounds are what you're going to have to look at on the journal screen to match sort of where on the map certain things are. And it's nice because when you look at the map is not overly colored. In fact, it kind of looks like a blueprint. It's just like a very dark screen, and then all of the major features are just like this blue kind of thin outline, but very detailed. The different hazards will show up in a little bit of color or be vaguely obvious. But again, the map, as you look at it, is very big and grandiose. So your marker and where you are is something you're going to have to kind of go back and forth and reference. So it's actually nice that the map screen is not like super distracting There will be certain features that have color pops, and this will often be in the background. So whenever there's a puzzle, typically when you take a screenshot, like the puzzle that you're going to go into the analysis screen with, it's typically where there are going to be a lot of lights, like laser lights. And anytime you take a screenshot, if there's a laser light, it'll show up and kind of linger for a minute. And that's often going to be an indicator like, okay, this is where you need to solve the analysis. And that'll show up just like any other screenshot location that you take when you're in the right frame to add it to the journal. Now, when you're taking snapshots and you're trying to like find out where a certain location is to fit it in your journal, if you're close to it, you'll actually see the outline of the rectangle of the picture that you're supposed to be taking, sort of in like this blue box, and it'll have like dash outline around it. So that's something that's helpful. Again, you want to save often just because you don't know if you'll step in a hazard, but also you can use the screenshot camera just as a way to like pulse the environment a little bit. So any kind of laser beams that might be involved in puzzles will pop up, as well as if there are the actual screen locations for where you're finding the fast travel journal location. And in terms of themes and setting, so this is super interesting. There's a strange cross between future and ancient. Some of the environments kind of go both ways. So you're going to be in like caves, but also like lab spaces, like where lab experiments are happening, where there's reactors happening, but then other times you're going into people's homes. Obviously, a lot of the technological things are very futuristic, very forward thinking, again, physics, science related, but then some of these caves or homes sometimes can have like inklings of maybe being like ancient ruins, or at least look certain ways. Like one of the major areas that has like a building or places where people stay, or like multiple levels, it almost reminds me of like from Star Wars, like almost like a cantina vibe, like how you're able to go in and out, and like the tops of some of these buildings, or just like maybe the pillars that you're seeing. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of futuristic technology and some kind of primitive, I don't want to say architecture, but then it contrasts because you'll have elevators that are like super high tech, but then you'll have boats to travel across the water, or you'll have like these ski lift things. Really a lot of interesting things coming together here. And then you have your character, which for the most part of this game, it's just you. You're seemingly alone, and that certainly contributes to a vibe, but the origin of you, the beginning of the game is very quick. It kind of throws you into it. I think you're from like maybe a more advanced civilization or a different time, maybe, and you wind up teleporting here either to, observe and be kind of an historian, or to help certain people. It's a weird kind of civilization, like you don't know what your part is in this, if you're from this civilization, if you're from another dimension, kind of looking on at this civilization, or if you're from an eternal perspective and you're just coming. It's really interesting, and the game doesn't really kind of spoon feed it to you, so there actually is a lot of journal reading that you're doing of the civilization that you're at, but I don't know if you are a part of that, so it's an interesting perspective, I would say. I may be wrong about some of the details. I feel like the beginning of the game was so long ago, I just kind of got thrown in. But there's an interesting perspective of your character, I feel. And then, of course, the physics, the science. This is heavy particle physics. This is like very advanced stuff, like collegiate, graduate school level stuff. A lot of what you're doing as your character is you're following sort of the research timeline about the discovery of certain particles or certain energy from the civilization or the specific characters that you're following the paths of, or trying to document where they are or where they were. It's really interesting, and I'm somebody that teaches science. Some of this stuff was maybe a little over my head, but I would highly suggest that you read it because it's super interesting. It's kind of an anthropological analysis. It's interesting because when you get lore dumps from the different NPCs, when you find certain locations that tell you about the NPCs, you're getting interesting accounts, like things are written from the perspective of individuals. And also, the more you read, you might get clues to certain things. There may be puzzles involved with reading the lore, finding things. That's something that I found out pretty late game, and I was really jazzed about kind of getting into the backtracking and stuff like that. But we talked about the puzzles where you're, sort of taking the tiles and putting them in the right place. You're like lining up the energy movement as it passes through particles or gets split into different things, switching the filters to see where certain things go to make it line up with the tiles that you have. Really cool stuff. I really dig the puzzles and just the whole gambit of, heavy science nerd stuff. Very cool. And then finally, in terms of audio, really, really enjoyed the soundtrack of this game. It had moments of sort of cavernous, ominous feels to it, some loneliness that really went alongside the fact that it's just your character. For most of the game, like you're just kind of analyzing these individuals and you don't know if they're long gone or like if this was yesterday, but it's really just you. And I think the music really adds to that. There's a little bit of maybe Animal Well soundtrack in here, but not as dire. Animal Well had a little bit of an eeriness to it. I don't feel that as much here. I feel more like lonely wonder. Also like visions of maybe like empty void of space and maybe some night sky, space travel, or just the distance between things, time. I don't know. These are just random thoughts I'm having. But really matches the feel of the game as you're playing through it. And I really enjoyed it. And I really would like it if they did a physical vinyl. So hopefully they hear this and get that going. All right, let's wrap up the conversation about Exographer or Exographer. This was a really great experience for me, and I was surprised at how hooked I got. There were certain points where I was just like, I want to get back into this game. Like I would come home from work and I'd be like, I want to play a couple hours. I want to see where this goes next, what the next puzzle is. So I really got hooked into it. And I would say it took a bit to understand the scope of the game, how the fast travel works, all of those things, how everything's tied together. I'd say my first few hours in the game, I was just pushing forward and I wasn't really sure where it was going, or I was getting a little sort of antsy about how I wasn't sure how to get back to where I was before. And I had noticed in the beginning of the game sort of some Metroidvania things where I was like, I should be able to go here at some point. And that is something that always stresses me out, remembering past places. But I was surprised that once I got it, everything just kind of fell into place. I did my backtracking, and then I started to play as a completionist where it was like I didn't want to move forward until I got all the things on the map. So I really dig how the game unfolded in that way. And I'd say this game is very unique. I think the platforming, very innovative, the upgrade synergy, the complexity of something like Mega Man or even Animal Well, like using things in different ways or recognizing that you can make certain platforming things happen, all without the threat of combat. So this is really where it sets it apart from games like Animal Well or Mega Man or things where you have to worry about being chased or whatnot. Like there's no stress, and yet it still has like that hook, that sort of innovative platforming mindset where it's like, this is really engaging, even though I'm not constantly threatened and have to like balance different things. So I really commend the game for not putting like time pressure or skill pressure even on. Great puzzle solving, really enjoyed it. Puzzle solving from platforming perspective, from using the environment, from doing the card matching. Again, really being able to take your time. And if you're anybody who's a science nerd, this is really heavy into physics, particle physics. I know the guy who was the lead developer or the head of the studio, like he is a physicist, he teaches physics, and refreshing depth in the specific field. So I am not somebody who is really into particle physics or really knows a lot about particle physics. I primarily teach chem. But this really spoke to me as a science teacher, despite some of the individual topics kind of being over my head at times. In terms of value, I think $20 is solid for this game. I got it for $12. That's a great sale price, and I think that is highly worth it. I think if this scratches your itches, $20 is a good price. If you're not somebody who's into the whole science or physics things, I would not get intimidated by it. Do not let that turn you off. This is still a great 2D Metroidvania platformer with unique puzzles and really rewarding lore and commentary about society and civilizations. And so for everyone, I do highly recommend this game. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Stay tuned for our next episode to see what new game we found for you.